Thank you very much for coming. What fascinating presentations. The new works were so beautiful, and the video game looked really fun and interesting, so we're definitely going to have to check that out. My name is Michael Giamossi. I'm from Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. Today, I'm going to be talking about Shofuso, the Japanese house in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. I think it kind of changes the subject a little bit, but I think still kind of relates as a continuation of the crossroads of art and multiculturalism. So I'm just going to tell a little bit of a story, a little bit of a history. So thank you guys very much for joining me today. My presentation today is it's about unity, perseverance, cross-cultural understanding. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share this snippet of multiculturalism in today's Japanese Philadelphian community. Shofuso, the Japanese house and garden in Fairmount Park, sits fairly innocuously. To the average visitor, its history and importance is second to its exoticism and beauty. But that uncertain history and ultimate persistence has delivered not just a beautiful house, but a welcoming home to the Japanese Philadelphian community today. This presentation, much like Shofuso itself, is about Utsushi and the spirited homage. Yuki Yokoyama of the Japan-America Society of Greater Philadelphia describes Utsushi as not simply copying the form of the inspiration, but rather building creative communication, softly expanding on foundation and creating an interrelated family of masterpieces. Utsushi cuts across time and space, spans the globe and spans generations, and will outlast us all. We continue this conversation so that the next generation may have its chance to speak as well. And today I'll trace that back. I like to begin Shofuso's lineage at the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. It was the first World's Fair in the Americas and Japan's first foray into modern globalism after Sakoku, its isolationist period. While Japan sent over 7,000 crates of wares, it was their Japanese dwelling and commissioners' buildings that captured the American audience. According to the exhibition guide and the Atlantic Monthly, the two were regarded as the finest piece of carpenter work ever seen, making everything else at the fair look commonplace and vulgar in comparison. From that, Americans were hooked on Japanese creations. Fast forward 30 years to the Louisiana Purchase Centennial Exhibition in 1904. Japan presented this 14th century Neomon temple gate. Two industrialists were so taken that they purchased the gate and moved it to Philadelphia and commissioned a small lotus pond to go with it. The Neomon quickly became one of Philadelphia's best known and best loved landmarks, but it was quickly plagued with neglect and vandalism. The attacks got so bad that at one point the park commissioner thought that it may need to be torn down. However, the Neomon would suffer a far more tragic fate as, while under construction in 1955, a carelessly discarded cigarette ignited the structure, burning it for 3 devastating days. But this is rather quite fitting for it, as the Neomon symbolizes the birth and death of all things. From this death, Shofuso was given the opportunity to live. Just as the U.S. was infatuated with Japan, Japan was falling in love with the U.S. Prolific architect Frank Lloyd Wright was invited to redesign the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo. A 15-year-old Yoshimura Junzo would visit in 1923, which sparked an undying love for the craft. It was the first time that I felt emotional when faced with architecture, Junzo recalled. How could he have known that at the time he would go on to work with Wright's protege, Antonin Raymond? After the horrific Kanto earthquake, Antonin and his wife/design partner, Noemi, decided to stay and help rebuild the city. According to architect and historian Terunobu Fujimori, who you may hear in Michael Stern's later presentation this afternoon, Junzo saw a photo of the Raymond's Tokyo home in a magazine, guessed that it was in the Akasaka region, and walked throughout the neighborhood to try to find it and ask for a job. He would eventually go on to work with the Raymonds at their Tokyo and then in their New Hope, Pennsylvania offices. We in Philadelphia adore Also adored Junzo's office colleague, visionary craftsman George Nakashima. George and Junzo quickly became quite friendly in Pennsylvania, and in his memoir he writes, "Junzo knew so well the elegance of power and simplicity, the beauty of proper materials in building, the delicacy of unfinished wood. He knew these things well in both the time-honored Japanese design and in the free modern concepts, and he passed them to me." This time in Pennsylvania clearly moved Junzo, inspiring in his work a perfect balance of traditional Japan and the modern West. But this idyllic life in Pennsylvania could not last, as tensions boiled over in the Pacific. Junzo and many of his colleagues departed on the last Japanese ship out of San Francisco, leaving his newly purchased New Hope home just 18 months after he arrived. Writing in his journal, Junzo's thoughts swirled. "Many things are going through my mind right now like a dream, and every image ends in peaceful life of New Hope." In a letter to their Tokyo office, Noemi Raymond lamented that art had ceased to exist everywhere. Junzo returned home to Japan, but George Nakashima, like so many other Japanese Americans, was arrested and sent to Minidoka internment camp in Idaho, where he learned woodworking. Unlike so many others, though, he and his family were sponsored by the Raymonds to return to New Hope, where his workshop still stands today. Despite Yoshimura's legacy going largely unknown in the United States, he has cemented himself as the most classical among contemporary Japanese architects. Focused on the human scale of architecture, in Japan he loved to design homes. "I'm gladdened when I have completed a building and can see people having a good life inside," Yoshimura recalled. "Being able to sense that the family enjoys their daily life, isn't that the most rewarding moment for an architect?" But it was his work on the International House in Tokyo with architects Kunio Makaiwa and Junzo Sakakura for the Japan Society that propelled his international success. On the other side of the world, in New York City, the Museum of Modern Art had just concluded its second successful House in the Garden installation. In search of a third home to exhibit, longtime Japan Society patron John D. Rockefeller III introduced the I-House architects to new curator Arthur Drexler. Drexler immediately saw the salient relevance to modernism in traditional Japanese architecture and tapped Yoshimura to head the new project. To Yoshimura, traditional Japanese architecture was in and of itself modern, with its space, light, air, openness of plan, and lightness of appearance. So the pair were a perfect match. The MoMA team toured Japan, and Drexler was struck by the Kojo-in reception hall at the Onjoji Temple in Otsu City, outside of Kyoto. As a shoanzukuri structure, it was not the most common or vernacular Japanese structure, but Yoshimura had always considered shoanzukuri as fundamental Japanese architecture. But the new building would not just be a carbon copy of Kojo-in, it would be Utsushi. With Shofuso, Yoshimura would attempt to create a dialogue between old and new, between Kyoto and New York, between traditional and modern. With a clear vision, Shofuso started construction, but the plans and details changed constantly, as they always do. Seemingly, one of Drexler's most significant contributions was to assuage Junzo's concerns about the budget. "Dear Junzo," he reassured his frugal architect, "good architecture, any place, any time, is expensive." With significant grants from the Japanese government and personal contributions from John and Blanchette Rockefeller, Junzo eventually got over his spending aversion. Take, for example, the Hinoki bark roof, the only of its kind outside of Japan. Taken with special permission from Japan's national cypress forests, the elegant and expensive wood is Shofuso's most identifiable feature, but even today its upkeep costs more than $20,000 per year. Or look to the mossy stones that line the garden. Each of the 23 tons of stones were hand-selected from the Takayama Mountains by famed gardener Tansai Sanao and carefully wrapped to preserve the growing moss. Laid deliberately with great care, Sanao perfectly evoked a deep mountain scenery akin to Kojo-in. The house and garden surpassed curator Drexler's highest expectations, creating an illusion so perfect that, according to his own words, one almost believes oneself to be in Kyoto. Before the exhibit opened, Drexler also bestowed the project its name, Shofuso, meaning Pine Breeze Villa. just as its predecessors had in Philadelphia, Shofuso in New York immediately captured the American public. You can see the Hinoki bark roof here. It opened on June 20th, 1954 to an astounding 1,300 visitors who were so taken by its profound absence of clutter and clean lines and simple elegance. Newsweek compared it to a Piet Mondrian painting. Juxtaposed with the towering skyscrapers of Midtown Manhattan, Shofuso exemplified the spirit of mono no aware, the intimate harmony of one with their surroundings, inviting one to slow down amongst the hustle and bustle of the city. By the end of its first season, over 120,000 people had visited Shofuso, about 3 times more than each of the previous 2 exhibits. Life magazine would call it the city's most popular rendezvous. Curator Drexler noted that just about every important architecture at the time had visited Shofuso, or every important architect at the time had visited Shofuso to study its form and construction techniques. For its second season, the Japanese house welcomed an additional 100,000 viewers, and in October 1955, its time in New York had come to an end. But the Japanese house would live on. As a gift from Japan, it needed to find a permanent home on the East Coast. With the right connections and an advocate in John Rockefeller, Fairmount Park was selected for its handsome setting and record of maintaining historic homes, I suppose aside from the Neomon, which burned down. With the recent tragedy, though, the park was eager to continue its Japanese presence, a continuation of the Utsushi tradition. Yoshimura and Sano were equally excited about the prospect of moving for a larger, more vibrant garden. The efficacy of Shoanzukuri architecture hinges on a successful relationship with its surroundings. In his designs, Yoshimura was careful to blur the connection between man and nature, integrating floor-to-ceiling windows which framed the garden and koi pond as if a painting. Unfortunately, Sano was never able to finish the garden, so it remained incomplete for his Philadelphia premiere. The semi-finished state of the garden foreshadowed the challenges Shofuso faced in his first couple decades in Philadelphia. While it was quickly gaining popularity in the park, it was very much against the odds. The park hired Japanese Philadelphians to give outdoor-only tours dressed in kimonos, transmogrifying the storied house into a fetishized art installation as an exotic backdrop for a white audience. Likewise, Shofuso suffered a series of especially ruthless vandal attacks throughout the 1960s and 70s. In a particularly heinous attack, a small fire was set inside. Conditions worsened until Japan threatened to repossess the house in the mid-1970s. With the 1976 bicentennial approaching, Japan instead granted an additional $500,000 as a 200th birthday gift to the United States for its restoration. Shunzo Yoshimura returned to Philadelphia to oversee the much-needed major renovations. Entered the 1980s, a time of vicious trade war between Japan and the United States. These geopolitical tensions reignited anti-Japanese sentiments comparable to World War II. In the midst of this anger and distrust, one Japanese American, new to Philadelphia, looked to embrace her heritage through the arts and culture of her Issei, or immigrant, parents. Dr. Mary Ishimoto Watanabe, the first Asian American to earn a doctorate from Harvard's biology program, joined the Japanese American Citizens League, aimed at bringing together Nisei, or first-generation Philadelphians. With the perfect opportunity for a community headquartered in Fairmount Park, the JACL formed the Friends of the Japanese House and Garden in 1981 to gain stewardship over Shofuso. Ignited by her experience being interred and the current climate of anti-Japanese sentiment, the group worked tirelessly to bring together Issei and Nisei in search of community. They fought to support the redress movement, lobbying for a formal apology for the unjust imprisonment, determined for a larger demonstration of coalition building within the context of the civil rights movement. For the Shofuso, the Friends worked to recontextualize and reclaim the Japanese house for a Japanese community. Instead of as an exotic voyeur, In Shofuso, they created a convening space and a cultural educator more closely aligned to the original vision at MoMA. Just as Yoshimura and Drexler worked to teach about Japanese construction, the Friends carried on the tradition of multicultural understanding. The Friends also implemented regular renovations for Shofuso. They rearranged the Tsukiya Tea House, added an entry gate, and redesigned the Subaniwa courtyard garden. In 1999, the Friends raised $1.2 million to restore the Hinoki bark roof, meticulously working completely by hand. It was restored again in 2011 and in 2017, with the latest costing $75,000. Further, to help restore Shofuso as a total work of art, in 2007, artist Hiroshi Senju donated 20 custom Nihonga murals to replace the damaged original Fusuma screens. The work that the Friends had put into reclaiming and restoring Shofuso was becoming obvious, and upon his visit, Senju noted that he could sense the presence of Japan. In 2016, the Friends merged with the Japan-America Society of Greater Philadelphia, who took over the management of Shofuso. In spring of 2020, the garden underwent a massive and historic renovation. They even dug up original plans from Sonoma. As with all Japanese gardens, and really all long-standing gardens, they evolved pragmatically, with each iteration continuing in the line of Utsushi from the prior. According to prolific landscape architect Takomi Kato, the garden in Philadelphia has been well loved by various groups of people throughout its history. More recently, however, the COVID-19 pandemic proved to be a challenge for Shofuso. In 2022, the house was a target of a massive vandal attack, suffering $2 million worth in damages, including Hiroshi Senju's paintings. While there is no evidence that the attack was racially motivated, it was still the culmination of 2 years of anti-Asian violence during the pandemic. I think the kicker for me is it took Philadelphia police 9 hours to respond to the scene. They thought it was a restaurant. Thankfully, the paintings and the rest of the house has been restored and has since reopened to the public. While anti-Asian sentiment ebbs and flows with international geopolitics, it is important to challenge this at every opportunity, and Shofuso can be an important ally. Today, Shofuso still stands as a multicultural hub, continuing the Friends' intent to present cultural Japanese programs. The JASGP hosts Sakura in April, Children's Day in May, Tanabata in July, Oban in August, Atsukimi in October, as well as monthly tea demonstrations, film screenings, art exhibits, and Japanese language lessons. While its cultural importance is often overshadowed by its exotic beauty, there is a lot more to Shofuso. Its unique history is intertwined with global conflict, racism, and horrible mismanagement, but is also replete with perseverance, commitment, and idealism. The Friends of the 1980s and the Japan-America Society, which cares for it today, have turned this house into a home. While no one lives there, it has been adopted by those who have felt marginalized, establishing and nurturing a community built on understanding, acceptance, and mutual respect. Junzo Yoshimura once said that a good house is one with something of a vague focal space, or a center of spatial gravity. For Shofuso, perhaps this true center is and will continue to be those who care for it and those for whom it cares. We are extremely lucky to inherit this special legacy that spans centuries and continents, and it is our responsibility to pass it along to the next generation. We can continue the spirit of Japanese presence in Philadelphia by being excellent stewards of the house and garden. By honoring the idealism of Junzo Yoshimura, Mary Watanabe, and all of those who have been determined to uplift Shofuso, we can be proud to have a small part in this long and storied legacy of this house. Thank you very much. I know we're close by. If anyone lives close by, I highly recommend going to see it. They are doing their Cherry Blossom Festival next month, which I highly recommend.